Hello, everybody. Fantastic to see you and happy World Habitat Day. It is so good to be spending today with you all. And in a minute, I am going to pass over to our amazing moderator, Karen Lee. First of all, please do turn your audio to mute and we will get started. Today is a really, really special day and a special conversation that we are having. And we're excited to introduce our two speakers. My name is Jo Hayes. I'm the CEO of Habitat for Humanity Hong Kong. And it is such an amazing pleasure for us at the Habitat team to see how many people have actually signed up to join the discussion today. It really does demonstrate how critical this conversation is. So without further ado, we've got some amazing questions to get through and some interesting answers that will follow. So Karen, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jo, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So welcome to the Habitat Hong Kong Housing Series today on the 3rd of October. It's World Habitat Day today. This year's theme is Mind the Gap, Leave No One and No Place Behind. Around the world, people are taking time to recognize the state of inequality in cities and the socio-economic gaps, which have been exacerbated by the pandemic and accelerating effects of climate change. Before we go any further, just a quick reminder that if you would like to listen to the discussion in Chinese, in Cantonese, please press the translation interpretation button on your screen. Also, we want to let you know that this session will be recorded. I'm Karen. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and Project Manager at the Jockey Club Design Institute for Social Innovation, in short DISI, at Polytechnic University of Hong Kong. I'm also a member of the Public Policy and Programs Committee at Habitat Hong Kong. I'm very excited to be joined today by Mr. Ricky Chu, Chairperson of the Hong Kong Equal Opportunities Commission, and Susan Araka, Housing Development Expert from Region Africa Office of UN Habitat. A very quick introduction. Ricky leads the Equal Opportunities Commission, EOC, enforce the anti-discrimination ordinance and promote the value of equal opportunities in Hong Kong. Throughout his career in leadership of various public offices, he has been dedicated to upholding justice in society and has received numerous awards for his distinguished contributions. Susan has studied rural housing planning and management of sustainable housing and habitat development. Her passion is for decent housing and how it affects livelihoods by demystifying housing issues and bringing them to the forefront of urban development through affordable and sustainable architecture. Both Susan and Ricky have achieved so much and have such lengthy bios, so you can find out more on our social media pages to know a bit more about them. Today, we'll explore with Susan and Ricky the World Habitat Day theme of leaving no one behind. Around the world, people are taking time today to acknowledge the state of inequality in cities and increasing socio-economic gaps. These themes resonate here in Hong Kong as we regularly top global wealth inequality rankings. Right now, the income disparity between rich and poor in Hong Kong is the highest it has been in over 45 years. So it is a really critical issue. As you could imagine, in this economic environment, affordable and adequate housing is out of reach for many. Now, to get us started, so I just want to ask Ricky and Susan to share a little bit of your views with us. Now, the global theme for World Habitat Day begins with 3 words: mind the gap. Cities and communities around the world are still recovering from over 2 years of successive COVID waves. Susan, as a housing expert, how has COVID pandemic impacted an already large inequality gap in cities and housing? And likewise, Ricky, what's your take on this as a champion of equal opportunities? So let's start with Susan.
Thank you, Karen, for that awesome introduction. Indeed, apart from wealth factors, like conflict, wealth factors, there are other things like conflict, climate change, natural disasters, and not limited to that, also cultural influences that widen the gap in achieving equalities in cities. COVID-19 is significant because it affected all persons. It did not discriminate whether you were rich or poor. It did not discriminate whether you were living in cities or in rural areas. Good health is everybody's concern. And when the pandemic struck, people relied on health warnings and information to stay alive. However, a lot of low-income groups were severely affected because their income was interrupted, especially during the lockdowns and curfews. But that was necessary in order to control the spread of COVID. So while in one area we are trying to keep people healthy, in another area it was affecting the low-income groups. Also, the social life and networking was affected, and we saw, especially in cities in Africa, we saw a lot of domestic strife. That is violence against children, against violence even with spouses. So there was a lot of domestic violence. In many African cities, because of social connectivity with rural areas, we saw a lot of people moving out of the cities due to lack of income and going to their rural areas. The best thing about this is that decentralized responses by governments, we appreciate that, because through that, a lot of people are able to be reached, whether they were in the urban areas or in the rural areas. But we also saw that a properly planned city makes health management easy. So in terms of places that are not properly planned, it was not easy to get like emergency health management there. We also saw that there was the availability of local resources, local community resources, including willingness and commitment to work with the government, helped in management of COVID-19 without leaving anyone behind, such that if there was any case reported, whether it was a rich person or a poor person or a woman or a child, there was quick reaction by the governments. Yeah, I think I will give it over to Ricky.
First, thanks, Joe, for inviting me, and thanks, Kevin, for your kind introduction. As Susan had just said, COVID-19 doesn't really distinguish victims, and it attacks everyone the same. But I would like to also emphasize that the impact caused by COVID-19 is different. It does hit certain sectors in our communities harder than others. Give you some example. Sectors like tourism, cross-border transportation, business, or hotels, etc. They are suffered much more seriously than the others. Apart from talking about business sectors, there are communities or groups in our society, such as people with disabilities, the ethnic minorities, those senior in age, or people having a responsibility to take care of others. These groups of people, they are actually facing much more severe challenges because of the resultant economic downturn caused by this pandemic. And talking about the impact in particular on housing inequalities, it involves several issues that, for example, the pandemic really hits the supply of housing units, in that many construction projects were either stopped or at least slowed down simply because less construction workers are available due to the stringent pandemic prevention measures. And also, citizens' purchasing power for flats is substantially weakened because either of the high unemployment rate or uncertainty in job markets. This uncertainty particularly hit harder on low-income groups, or people are more vulnerable. The third issue is that the living conditions in general becomes worse as the pandemic prevails, because people are relying more and more on home delivery service. They cannot go out as frequently as before the pandemic. And in these circumstances, the aged population, people with disabilities, would be more difficult to attend clinics or hospitals for medical treatment, and they are compelled to stay at home more often. And then when we talk about, say, the ethnic minorities, they would more often feel being isolated or even alienated because they cannot get the updated information, maybe because of the language barriers, fewer chances to physically contact with the neighbors. So even though on occasions they would have to face microaggressions or even discrimination, mainly because of the difference in culture and living styles. So overall, during the pandemic time, we have seen societies tending to be more divided, and the less privileged communities have to face more challenges in their daily lives because of the stigmatization and biased attitude by others. the gap is indeed wider because of the pandemic, and it's really undesirable.
Well, thank you for both of you to give such a eloquent picture of what we are facing in the two different cities or two different communities, which I can see some lessons or some themes emerging actually. So it seems like those that have a lower income and they do not have access to information, or they are like suffering from the lack of infrastructure, they will be those that are suffering more from this pandemic situation than the others. Now, can I just ask both of you, if we are talking about inequalities without even this COVID situation, what can we really do to address these? Like, can innovation, for instance, help to do something? For example, like what Susan was saying in terms of people are moving out because of the job availability or even information or infrastructure. The same for Hong Kong, like even though Hong Kong is a very small city, but essentially we're doing the same thing, like access to information, facing inequalities in terms of housing access. Is there anything that we can really do in terms of third sector input to sort of help address all these inequality issues from your point of view?
I think mostly in the rural cities, the smaller cities, data and documentation is key, because most cities were relying, were developing their knowledge as the COVID-19 was going on. So it is better to have this data before, because it helps in mitigating future health challenges, and it also helps in changing habits, and it also helps them to value any infrastructure that have been put during this COVID-19 period, in order for them to react in case of any other, not just health challenges, but also other pandemics. Also enhancing public-private sector partnerships, because a lot of private sector came out to try and assist what the governments were trying to do. It was not a for-profit assistance. So enhancing that to complement what governments are doing, and working on the networking and social cohesions without leaving anyone behind. At least we saw during the reactions in mitigating COVID-19, there was little to no discrimination. Everyone was being treated as a victim. And then we can also tap on the local community resources, like I mentioned before, especially the willingness of the community to work with the government in management of COVID-19. In fact, in some communities, they are the ones who are coming up with ways of identifying people who are experiencing symptoms, and even identifying hospitals that have spaces to take in people who at least were suffering more. And also the common practices that were being given, the information that was being given: wash your hands, wear masks, keep social distance. The community's willingness to make sure that this was being carried out can also be tapped. Yes, thank you.
In EOC, we have to alleviate the discrimination issues by adopting, in broad sense, a three-pronged approach. I.e., we enforce the anti-discrimination laws by receiving complaints, dealing with them, and we explain different situations. We explain the laws to the citizens who show concern in these issues. On the other hand, we propose policies, measures, and best practices, guidelines to either the government and also to business sectors, NGOs, etc., where appropriate, with a view to preventing microaggressions, discriminations, and harassments. And on the education side, we conduct trainings to both civil servants, organizations who invite us to do so, or we also conducted regular trainings by receiving applications from citizens who wants to know, have interest in knowing about equal opportunities measures. And we conduct public campaigns, including public education and advertisement, etc., to raise the awareness of citizens on important issues of equal opportunities. Also on topical issues, say like pregnancy discrimination or like ethnic minorities facing difficulties in renting flats, etc. Particularly during the pandemic times, we always voice out our concerns, or we speak on behalf of the vulnerable groups if we see something unfair happening either in the media or in reality by reports. Such as on one occasion, I remember that people were criticizing that a certain ethnic minority lady were accused of spreading the virus, etc. And we clarify the issues, we clarify the misleading stigmatizations issues for them. So we do speak out and we do policy advocacy work regularly with a view to alleviate all the discrimination issues.
I know actually Ricky's team does much more than that, really. They also very much champion PPPs to support the vulnerable groups, the ethnic minority groups, and really help to champion their voices and help the government give them on top support from the business sector and the philanthropy sector even, and the NGOs trying to help those most vulnerable at the times of the needs. Both of you have done really amazing work, and I really encourage everyone to visit bios and link to that information to look at their work even closer. That's a very good introduction to what we really see as a particular point in time with pandemic situation, how housing and equality can be tied together and make it even worse, the equality issue here. Now, if we jump back a little bit in terms of like city design, or like, thinking about the structural issue in society, the policy side, let me bring to the attention maybe those who are not familiar with Hong Kong. Like, we have a subdivided flat issue in Hong Kong, and it is created when a flat is divided into 2 or more units to house people. Now, this situation appears in like very developed countries and very developed cities as well, say like in London or like in Taiwan, in Tokyo, we see these too. But in Hong Kong, it's even worse because the long waiting time for public rental flats means that the city's poorest families end up in tiny shared spaces as there's no alternative for them. Many of these high density flats can be found in dilapidated buildings that are windowless, poorly managed, and are plagued by issues such as poor ventilation, water seepage, and pests. Now, these actually negatively impact on the health and well-being of the tenants. Now, over to you first, Susan. Now, you mentioned informal settlements in Africa before, which you are very, very much an expert in these issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about the situation in Kenya? In what ways the government is trying to address all this adequacy and affordability issues of divided or informal housing to improve the health and well-being of residents? And then afterwards, Ricky, I would ask you to tell us a little bit more about your work, how we can support all these subdivided flat residents or those living in decent housing. Over to you first, Susan.
Yes, now informal settlements can be looked at as places that are unregistered, inadequate housing, where houses are made of cheap substandard material so as to minimize investment risks, or where building standards and regulations regarding plot ratios, densities, land use are disregarded, so that housing developments are made in these areas and are unsustainable. They can also be looked at as what we call slums, just areas where people find space and decide to settle. So in two ways, some places have actual land registration, but the investors or the developers have decided not to follow any building and planning regulations in order to get as much money as possible from rental units. But it can also be looked at as places that are inadequate in terms of the housing. And in those urban areas, usually informal settlements are found in urban areas here. And in those informal settlements, you find the areas are constrained due to a high population. So the living arrangements in that place lead to changes in the household structure. We ordinarily would think that mothers and fathers should not sleep in the same room with the children, especially if the children are preteen. But you see, in informal settlements, that is not considered. Everybody sleeps in the same room, eats in the same room. If it is the lounge, they lounge in the same room. So we are changing the household structure, and there are no social support systems in terms of how to ensure that cultural practices are carried out, or some of these behaviors that children see are not passed on to them. Also, monetization of the urban economy has made housing become very different, and it has also increased the gap between the segments of the urban population. And some of these sometimes even can motivate criminal behavior, causing insecurity. This monetization of that urban economy has seen housing become more market-oriented. That, of course, is the reason why we see houses being made in whichever way. And sometimes the rooms are so small, they cannot even be considered as living spaces. We see a lot of the people who live in those units have no say, because they are not the ones who produce housing for themselves. Most of the time, we have what we call slumlords, people who have a little bit of money who produce housing for others who come and rent. So what the government is trying to do, in Kenya especially, we have what we call the Kenya Slum Upgrading Program and the Kenya Informal Settlements Improvement Program. They try to make infrastructure and basic services reach to the last end in the informal settlements. Sometimes even improve the housing, like take down some of those slums, because most of these people settle in land belonging to the government. So they try to bring down the units and build other better units with basic services, with the cooking areas, with the water and power. And also they try to provide other social infrastructure, for instance, schools, halls, parking, open areas, in order to make the living conditions better.
Yeah, actually, in the Hong Kong share flat situation, I think in some degrees is similar to what Susan has mentioned in terms of living condition. Like people are invariably living in a very, very small size of areas. They have to use a common kitchen, common toilet, etc. Particularly Hong Kong is a humid and warm place most of the time in the year. And the air conditioning in those share flats are normally below standard, really. But in terms of equal opportunities, I would also like to emphasize some phenomena concerning the share flats. A little bit of background. Hong Kong, I think, has over 40,000 buildings, which are 30 years age or over. Many of these buildings need renovation. And for most of these buildings, they are particularly inconvenient to, say, people with disabilities, people who are old age, or children. Say, for example, in many old buildings, the entrance, they have a couple of staircases, but then they have no ramp. So with staircases without a ramp, that make it very difficult for wheelchair users to enter and use the building. That's for one example. And many of these buildings, they don't have a well-organized building management office. Many of them only have a caretaker. So if you have, say, a member of ethnic minority living in the building, very often he or she would feel very alienated. He or she doesn't know what's going on, because even if there are some building renovation notice or some pandemic measures that need to be taken place in that particular building, a notice may be put up in the lobby area, but it's only in Chinese. So people who don't know Chinese, cannot read Chinese, really would not know what happened. And this would help split the society. So they are very undesirable. So the government is planning very actively to make more public housing units so that people can leave the share flat after successfully apply for the public housing. But we would like to put the notice to government that when they build the new public housing units, they have to adopt universal design approach. In fact, not only for the government building or facilities, we are urging the whole society, in particular people working in innovation and technology sector, to design facilities or daily use utensils, etc., by adopting universal design concept, i.e. a piece of device that can be used both by people with disabilities and people without. This is very important for the way forward. That's what we try to appeal to the public, to the extent that starting from this year, every year the EOC would roll out some funding for innovative projects. And we have set aside a certain amount of funds, especially to cater for projects that aim at improving on people's awareness on universal design.
That's very interesting information from Ricky. This is the first time that I know of this. This is very good news, actually, because our building stock is really, really aged, like what Ricky's saying. A lot of all these buildings that we talked about is over 50 years old. And, you know, with the humid climate in Hong Kong, and most of these are constructed by concrete, we really need to service these buildings, or else like, we are really facing a massive issue in terms of the building quality. And the life cycle is really shortening. And like what Ricky was saying, a lot of all these old people, or like the most vulnerable people, are housed in these inadequate buildings. And there are a lot of illegal building works as well. So it goes back to the whole equality issue and the housing stock. How can we really place all these people that are most vulnerable and help them to improve their quality of living? So this fund is very good news for the sector and for Hong Kong in general to explore. Okay, so maybe we can talk about another issue, which is also part of the theme today, climate change. Research shows that poor housing and poor households with more limited resources often bear the brunt of extreme temperature and weather. Now, Oxfam Hong Kong released a report on effects of climate change of subdivided flat tenants, whose small flats can heat up like bamboo steamers and suffer water seepage and damage during typhoons and rainstorms. What are the ways to support and mitigate the effects of climate change for vulnerable individuals and families? Now, when we talked about this issue before, Susan told us there is no extreme climate condition in Kenya or in Nairobi, but I'm sure there are different things we can learn from you in terms of how to support those that are affected by climate change, say like even flood risks and things like that. Let's hear from Susan first, and then we can invite Ricky to share your views too.
Sure. There are no extreme weather patterns in Kenya, but of course we face some effects of climate change, especially right now we are going through some drought because it hasn't rained for quite some bit. So a lot of the people who are vulnerable, especially people living in the arid and semi-arid areas, are facing a lot of problems. They may not be living in cities. I had previously talked about people living in informal areas, suffering the most during disasters and during any extreme weathers because lack of maybe infrastructure. But in the other way, where we have the extreme climate, what I would call extreme climate, that is drought, we see a lot of the people who are affected are people who are living in the arid and semi-arid areas. And in fact, in Kenya, that is considered a very major issue, such that even the president has given it a ministry to deal with the issues there. So most of those who suffer is because of lack of, we have crop failure, so they have no food. Then a lot of the people who live in the arid and semi-arid areas are pastoralists, so their animals have no food and they rely on animals for meat and for milk. So when their animals die because there's no food and there's no water, the people are also affected because one, their livelihood is gone, their food is gone, they have no food that they have stored because they don't practice agriculture. We have also seen in terms of climate, because a lot of our energy is produced from the dams, hydroelectric dams. So we have seen a change, a complete shift on how we are also procuring our energy. So we are relying more on solar and also geothermal energy when the dams start running out of power. Running out of water due to the drought. So in one way it is a positive, but in another way it is negative because now we are lacking water. In terms of water use, we find that a lot of people have to go through water rationing. That now becomes a big problem because water is a basic need. We cannot live without water. And because of that water rationing, we find water now becomes a privatized commodity. And now that discriminates a major part of the urban poor. Because if you're buying water, which is a basic need, I mean, it puts you, when you have to divide money between food and housing, rent, and then there's water to buy, it becomes a very big problem. I think I'll stop at that. Maybe we can hear from Ricky.
Yeah, thanks. Well, as I just mentioned, Hong Kong is basically humid, hot throughout the year. At the moment, I think we have over 200 or even 300,000 people living in share flats. And even if they are not living in share flats, I mean, if you talk about flats in the urban areas in Hong Kong, particularly those traditional areas like Mong Kok, Sam Sui Po, Cheung Sha Wan, etc., they are really very densely populated already. So what people want living in those places, what obviously would be more time to leave the flat, to enjoy some fresh air in outdoor environment, etc. And it goes to the issue that, do we in Hong Kong have sufficient space, outdoor space, to enjoy our life? What about the country parks? What about the amenity facilities around parks even in the urban area? And I would say they are really short in supply. It also goes to the equal opportunities for those people who have bodily restrictions, people with disabilities, old people. Once again, it's not easy for them to leave their flats already, let alone talking about traveling to enjoy fresh air in a country park. And I remember that there were surveys in Hong Kong talking about accessibility problems in country park. Even you have very beautiful restaurant areas, but if you are a wheelchair user, in many places, it is impossible to go there. And then the lack of information. Once again, ethnic minorities, they may not know where the country parks are. What's the best place that they can go in holidays? They are still stuck in a very small place in their share flats, and it's undesirable. So Hong Kong, in the way of building itself towards a smart city, we have a lot of initiative, but we have to bear in mind that all these new initiatives must equip it also with the concept of DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, which would be important because, as we mentioned in the film, our film today, do not leave anyone behind. And the only way to ensure we can do this is to design things on a universally applicable concept before it becomes a reality. Make everything inclusive in the design stage, and then no one would be left behind.
That's a very interesting take on the climate change. We have very diverse answers from our two speakers, which I think both are very, very important points from what Susan was saying in terms of the basic need of water to what Ricky is saying, design, and like how our weather affects our walkability and mobility. So now that we bring in the design perspective, I do want to spend the last few minutes talk this through and pick your brains as well. Now, Ricky has already talked about how universal design can make a difference, especially when we're trying to improve the walkability and access to services or what we can do. Now, Susan, because I know that you're an urban design expert, so would you like to share your thoughts on how design could help to promote equality, especially when you talk about a society that is facing quite a lot of issues in terms of the age and demographic changes. You mentioned children as one of the specific areas that you want to talk about.
Yes, in fact, at one point when you asked me what an ideal city is, I said an ideal city is where a child and an elderly person can coexist peacefully without fear of exclusion. Where here I imagine that age inclusiveness demonstrates the circle of life from when if a child can exist in a place where there's adequate ventilation, the parents don't have to worry about, like in the streets, if they can play, if they have a play area where they can play, if they can go to school within their neighborhood. And even as the child grows into a preteen and then a teenager, they have places where they can hang out without fear of any discrimination or lack of surveillance. You're sure that if your child is out there, they are safe. Unfortunately, this is being seen, it's being revived in the cities through what we call gated communities. What if our cities were those gated communities? In fact, people are moving more and more into gated communities in the hope that to have a safe area where people can walk in the evening, where you can access the shops or the supermarket or the open areas with ease, without feeling any fear, without feeling like if you walk across, a car will hit you. People can cycle without worries. They are being replicated in these little cocoons of gated communities. But that is what we want to see our cities become. And then, unfortunately, these gated communities also come with a price. So what we are hoping for the city, it means somebody has to pay for it. Who is this who is going to pay for it? Is it us? Is it the government? But who, again, is making the city exclusive for some people? It must be because of the design. How the city is being designed is making a lot of people more and more excluded. So us as urban designers, we need to take cognizance that every time a superior urban function comes, let's say we want to do a super highway in a certain way, we have to be wary of the people who are around there. Even listen to them. Give them space to talk about what they want. If a road is passing through their place, what it is they want their place to look like. Not just come and say, because the land belongs to the government and this is a road reserve, we shall pass a road through here. We don't care what other people will say because we own this as a road reserve. No, the road serves the people who are around there, even if it also serves the people who are passing through there. So we don't need to kill communities by introducing other urban functions. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Karen.
I very much agree with you. I'm sure Ricky shares the same views too. Because of time, we should open the floor for Q&As from the audience. We have about 5 minutes or so. So can we invite some questions from the floor? You can either put it in the chat box or you can also raise your hand as well.
Thank you for this great conversation and all the insights. I guess I was wondering, what are some innovations? How can the community become more involved in planning? Like, what are some ways that city or neighborhood planning has become more participatory and collaborative? And how can these processes sort of contribute to decreasing inequalities?
Well, I think Susan has tried to answer a bit of that already. So maybe if I ask Ricky to contribute a bit to this conversation first.
Basically, we really need all hands on deck. We have to adopt this approach. If you look at the government website, you will see that the government in building Hong Kong to become a smart city, in fact, have issued on 2 occasions the blueprint. In the year 2017, issued the blueprint, and in 2021, last year, issued the blueprint 2.0, in which you can find more than 200 initiatives. And I think it's time for us to examine this initiative to ensure that they are inclusive of the concept of DEI and universal design. Because if we look at some statistics, for the world ranking in the progress to become a smart city, Singapore ranked number 1, Hong Kong 41. So you can see there is already a gap there. But Hong Kong has all the resource and capability to catch up. And I think it would be important for the government to collaborate with public and private sector entrepreneurs and those involved in the, say, information and communication technology, the STEM education, and also for organizations like EOC and many others, NGOs, to cause a change of people's mindset. Whenever you design things, have DEI in your mind, not wait until the device is completed. So it's really a philosophy. And we should also quantify our monitoring for progress in this direction by regularly conducting quantitative surveys to obtain citizens' feedback on the new initiative, on the device that come into place or the practice that are in place, etc. And the government can also take the lead to organize public consultation sessions, for example, on the new initiative to obtain citizens' feedback. So I think with everyone playing their role, contributing to an inclusive society, then I think things would naturally start to get momentum And if we keep the momentum, then we will catch up. Hong Kong has the potential and the ability, but we just need people to push more harder for it.
I think I agree with Ricky. I think system change is the way to go. We have to demonstrate that it works first, and then the government will relax a little bit and understand how they can integrate all these different communities and all these comments into their planning. How about you, Susan? What do you think?
I don't think there's any more to add to Ricky has said. Although I'm impressed that, I'm learning a great deal, especially from Ricky, that there's a commission whose role is to achieve inclusive society, free from discrimination. And one of the things I would wish for our governments to do, because we have a lot of legislations that are towards the greater good of humanity.
Yeah, that's right.
But we want to see the government create legal frameworks to implement these legislations. Promoting equality. Yes.
We have two questions in the chat box. I'll read it out to you. So how do you two see technology playing a role in resolving the problems we face? Well, to some extent, you guys have started to talk about it. So maybe a short answer?
Yeah, technology is the key ahead.
For us here, I think social media is the greatest platform to ensure that the government is looking at what is happening around. The fact that in Kenya, I think internet is all over the country. So it is easy for us to know what is going on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll just add my two cents here. I think urban analytics is very important as well, like how we can map different data together, overlapping the human side, the human data, and actual technical or built environment information, or even like complaints and like all these different issues. That will be very important for the government to realize where the pain points are or where the issues are, and then they can prioritize all these interventions. So I definitely see technology and the human interface as two key considerations. One more question to Ricky. Now, different contexts may need different solutions. With Susan's insight, in what ways her country experiences or practice wisdoms may be applicable easily or similarly in Hong Kong? In what ways you think might not be applicable so easily? So this is challenging Ricky on if he listened to Susan.
Well, I think even though Susan and I are in two distinguished different places, but I think there are some common principles that we can apply cross-border. Yeah, because in Susan's sharing, I think we listen to the difficulties that Susan's country is facing, and where I have said there are in fact some similarities with Hong Kong, particularly when we deal with people residing in densely populated areas. They face the same degree of difficulties. So I really think that there are lessons to learn between ourselves. Both places. It makes me think that if we can implement stronger cross-border collaborations by sharing the real situation experience between different countries, even in different continents, and extract the spirit from it. I think we can achieve mutual benefit by learning from each other. That's my 2 cents. So I think it's very important, a very good learning experience for me by listening to what Susan have said just now.
Yeah, same to me too. How about the reverse for you, Susan? Any lessons to take away from Hong Kong?
In fact, while we are not suffering from overpopulation, what we are suffering from is urban sprawl. We are trying to densify the cities so that we can avoid urban sprawl, where people are moving further and further away from the cities, therefore stretching the infrastructure, especially transport. So we find there's a lot of traffic of people who move from the city during the evening and come into the city in the morning. So we are trying to densify so that a lot more people live near where they're working. But I'm also hearing from Ricky that densifying and putting too many people in the same place also comes with its own challenges. So by listening to him, I think we are learning that we must include the open areas, the social facilities, ensure that we have proper buildings that are designed following the universal designs so that we don't suffer the same problems that are being seen now in Hong Kong. Thank you.
I think this conversation is so great. I really do want to carry further, but time is running out. So yeah, let's just put a stop here today. And I think Megumi's team can take note. Both of the speakers asked the team to think about more of these cross-border, cross-international sharing sections. So I'll hand it over to you guys. And Thank you, Ricky and Susan, again for sharing your thoughts and insights with us. This is a very important topic. Hopefully, we'll have a chance to talk to each other again. Thank you. Hand it over to Megumi.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah. Thanks, Megumi.
Thank you.